You're listening to the Doctor Is In podcast, brought to you by MartinClinic.com. During the episode, the doctors share a lot of information. As awesome as the info may be, it is not intended to diagnose, cure, treat, or prevent any disease. It's strictly for informational purposes.
Well, good morning, everyone. This morning, we're going to talk about everything depression, okay? We're going to talk about depression this morning, and I'll tell you why. Okay, here's the study. Here's the study that came out last week. 1/3 of Americans, so this is an American study, 1/3 of Americans are showing signs of clinical depression or anxiety. 1/3 of America, this is brand new, guys, okay? Before COVID, there was over, I think, 25, 30 million people that were on, in the United States alone, on antidepressants. And you know me, I've been saying it from day one, that the cure for the virus is going to be worse than the disease, the cure. And, you know, to some extent, then, you know, what do I know? All I'm saying is, I think there's a lot of built up frustration. You know, you saw it. And, you know, in the United States and Canada, Toronto and other places, Montreal, there was looting here in Montreal last night, I heard. And people are frustrated. We're meant to have fellowship with each other, you know. And we've been sort of locked down. I think people got very frustrated and it was sort of a powder keg. And boom, you know, people got out. Now nobody's talking about COVID. They're all talking about rioting. Terrible thing, you know, really is, for many, many reasons. But let me talk about depression, because they're saying, okay, this study is saying now 1/3 of the population in the US is suffering from symptoms of clinical depression and or anxiety. And so that's incredible when you think about it. Very incredible. And I want to talk about that this morning because it's a big thing that, you know, of course, over the years that I've treated. And I want to look at it maybe a little bit differently this morning. I want to talk about clinical findings that, and then what we can do about it. You know, because the problem with depression is if you get into clinical depression, not easy to come out of it. Because some of the things that you need to do that you're deficient in, once you're into a depression, you don't feel like doing almost anything. That's what depression is. And it's not easy, okay? But let me just tell you, I want to give you a little bit of, I've been doing a lot of work on depression and anxiety over the years. I mean, I think I've told my staff many a time, you know, my practice has really changed clinically. We saw, you know, we always talk about this. We talk about the difference in foods. You know, the world has changed. They changed our breakfast, you know, the food industry. They changed our flour. They changed our sugar. I think this is a big, big issue, especially changing the sugar to high fructose corn syrup. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that this week because there's another study with young people. And, you know, everything has changed in our society. And one of the biggest changes is in this area. Like in my practice, I saw a huge increase in anxiety. So here's just a little bit. Now, I always tell people this. You know, I took enough psychology in university to be dangerous. This is what I tell people. Like, I'm not a psychologist, okay? I have a brother who is a clinical psychologist, okay? I'm not a psychologist, but I got 46 years of practice, and I just give you some of my things that are hidden. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this morning, but just maybe to, when you see somebody that's depressed or suffers from depression, here's what I see clinically, but even emotionally, okay? I just want to talk about emotions for a minute, and then we'll get into what I have seen over the years clinically, and then what we ought to do about it. First of all, to prevent depression, okay? As much as we can prevent it. And the Bible has a lot to say about it because it talks about anxiety leads to depression. So if anxiety is left unchecked, it can lead to literal clinical depression. But let me just, I'm going to tell you 3 things that I found over the years in people that suffer with depression. Okay, there's 3 things I found emotionally, psychologically. Okay, it's in the background of most people over the years. And like I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I just want to put it out there so you can think about it. Okay, now, one of them is unresolved anger. Okay, unresolved anger. And that's looking at in the rear view mirror of your life and staying there. Okay, unresolved anger. Maybe you were abused, or maybe you had a relationship that went sour and you got unresolved anger in your life. Okay, so this is just generally what I found, because I'm the type of guy in practice. When I was in practice, I learned something from my dad. My dad asked questions. He used to tell me, patients have inside information. Ask questions. Okay. You want to find out something? Ask questions. So I used to go into people's history and ask them questions because it gave me a lot of information. So one of them, just generally, I found unresolved anger. Okay, unresolved anger. The second one generally was fear, uncertainty in people's lives. Okay, and they have fear. To me, this is one of the biggest issues in today's world, where they're saying 1/3 of Americans are showing signs of clinical depression. I tell you the reason, and this is why I always spoke to you about COVID, is that we gotta, when they said hammer down the curve, of the virus, you know what I was saying? Hammer down the fear, because people were scared to go outside. I'm not going outside. I'm going to get this virus. And they were more scared of the virus. But I was telling people, look, be very careful about that. I'm not saying don't take it seriously. All I'm saying is, man, it overwhelmed us. And people have, fear. They get that cortisol running 24/7. And this is a big issue when it comes to anxiety, then depression, fear. Cortisol is not meant to be running 24/7. You get fear, and then you're not sleeping properly. The brain won't turn off. And this is a big thing. So people, one, they're looking in the rearview mirror of their lives, and they're hurting. They got unresolved anger. They're angry all the time, and they don't realize it. Maybe people have never sat them down and said, look, you gotta forgive. Okay, you gotta give it over, because it's killing you. And then secondly, that fear. And we're gonna have a whole generation of people now with fear. And I blame the media to some extent, because the media never had it so good. They never had it so good. It's 24/7 of, it was the virus. Now it's going to be 24/7 of, they stir people up. Now listen, I'm not telling you, I'm glad we have the media. I mean that. But guys, you got to put it into perspective, like turn it off. Okay. And then thirdly, guilt. This is what I found, just generally me. Okay. Guilt. People live in guilt, and they can't get past that guilt. Failure in their life and whatever, they feel guilty. Maybe, my kids didn't turn out the way they should, and I feel guilty about it. I didn't do what I should have done, or whatever. But again, these are things that psychologically are in the background of that. And that's just my experience, okay? That's just my experience with people, okay? So I just wanted to throw that out there, because this is often, I find, in the background of people when it comes to problems with anxiety and clinical depression. Okay, so let's now talk about what I used to find clinically. Okay, when I tested people, what did I find generally was missing, or they had a lack of, or whatever, in clinical depression? And there was very little exceptions to this. Always exceptions, but there was very little exceptions to what I'm going to tell you, okay? Clinically, what did I find with people that had anxiety and more specifically clinical depression? When they got to a point that they were clinically depressed, okay? What did I find, okay? Generally, here's the clinical findings of people. And I've wrote down a list. I've got 7 of them, 8 of them. Okay, because I'm just looking. Okay, number one, not necessarily in the order of importance. They're all important. This is generally what I found. 1, low levels of B12. Yep, I can't say that I ever remember seeing a patient that was clinically depressed that didn't have low levels of B12. Don't you think B12 is an important vitamin? It is. It's a very important vitamin. And people generally in society today, for several reasons, are low in B12. One of the biggest reasons is people don't eat red meat anymore. They think it's bad for them. Red meat has become a boogeyman. People ask me, I don't think I go past a day where people don't ask me. And guys, ask questions, okay? We're here to answer your questions. So don't be shy. And no question is stupid, okay? Ask your questions. Here's what we're doing at the Martin Clinic. I'm no longer in practice, but I'm not gone anywhere. Like I'm answering probably more questions than I ever have in my life. Okay, so we're answering questions. We have our own private Facebook group, and people come on, they ask questions, and good for them. I got no problem. Ask your questions. And B12 is very low in people with clinical depression. It's just as simple as that. I have never seen, I can't think of a case where I ever saw that they had normal levels of B12. And the blood test is 100 years old. Put it to bed. Blood serum levels of B12 are very, very, the numbers don't mean much, you know, and doctors don't look at B12 anymore. I've talked to you about that in the past. They just don't look at it anymore. They used to. There wasn't a family doctor in the 1950s or whatever that didn't give B12 shots all the time. And then it sort of lost its edge with the big pharmaceutical industry coming in, and instead of trying to help people holistically, especially by the 1970s, they started with antidepressants, which is a Band-Aid, which was meant to be temporary. They used to have a warning. I don't even know if they have a warning on the box anymore. This wasn't to be used. It was supposed to just get you through a hard time, a difficult period in your life, and then stop using them. But people have been using them for 30, 40 years. Anyway, I don't want to get into that as much as low levels of B12. They don't eat enough red meat. B12 is a very large vitamin, by the way. Structurally, it's a very large vitamin, okay? And the problem with that is, if you got any digestive issues, you usually are not absorbing B12. So the fact that, you know, the young generation especially, and I tell you, this is a crisis in my opinion. The young generation has bought hook, line, and sinker that they shouldn't eat red meat. It's got eyeballs. And they don't, you know, that's not good for me. And then they go after this stupid, I hate to use the word stupid, but it's stupid, meatless craze. Guys, my PhD is clinical nutrition. You can't get enough vitamins, especially B12, in the plant kingdom. It's not there. I don't know how to express that more passionately. And this is why, like, I you know, I love young people, okay? And I get, especially girls, okay? I get hundreds and hundreds a year into my office, and I used to look them in the eyeballs and, can I talk you out of being a vegetarian? Or can I talk you out of being a vegan? Please, can I talk you out of it? In a loving way, I used to do it. If you came into my office I loved you automatically. I have a passion for people, but I can't stand being lied to, guys. And I know you go and there's all sorts of gurus out there and you go online and whatever. And what I'm saying to you today, a lot of people will tell you that Dr. Martin, he's a quack. And they bought the lie of the plant kingdom. The plants are good, guys, but you need the animal kingdom. Big time. Your body, you just can't, you need that to have B12. You're not going to get it. B12 in the plants is enough for a mouse, and you're not a mouse. And your brain needs B12, guys, okay? Your brain needs B12. Guess what? I'm not getting through all this. I stopped. I gave you a lecture on red meat and B12. You need it. Never mind the heme iron. You need that. Heme iron is found in red meat. It ain't in the plant kingdom. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. It's just not there. Okay, secondly, you guys knew I was going to say this, so why didn't you just say it before I did? Low levels of vitamin D. Low levels of vitamin D. It is 100% in people who suffer from clinical depression. They have low levels of vitamin D. And there's another one that throughout North America, people are extremely low in B12. And Linda is saying, what happened? Doesn't matter if your B12 is high. Good. You want high B12. It's a water-soluble vitamin. What's that mean? It means you ain't overdosing on B12. I got too much B12. No, B12 is good for you. I aim high. You need optimized levels of B12. So what if your B12 is high? It's a water-soluble vitamin. You know what? It's amazing to me. It gets checked off as being high. What's that mean? Good. You want B12 to be high. You don't want it to be low. A lot of people, my B12 is normal. I said, well, that's crap. You don't want your B12 to be normal. You want your B12 to be optimized. You want your brain to work. Low levels of B12. Low levels of vitamin D. The sun is so therapeutic. We're human solar system. Every cell in your body needs vitamin D, including your brain cells. You don't make enough melatonin without vitamin D. You don't make enough serotonin without vitamin D. You don't make enough dopamine without vitamin D. You don't make enough GABA without vitamin D. Your feel-good hormones. When there's an imbalance, it's usually a nutritional deficiency. Vitamin D. And one of the reasons, we talked about this last week, one of the reasons that low levels of vitamin D is a bad diet. Generally, and very few exceptions to this, people that are clinically depressed are bad eaters. They're bad eaters. That's very important. You know me. My name is Tony and I'm a carboholic. Put your hand up. Because the people that have depression, clinical depression, generally what I found over the years, they were bad eaters. They were carboholics. They love their sugar. And remember, one of the biggest lies in the world that happened to our society is when the food industry discovered high fructose corn syrup. It's sugar on steroids. It's made in a lab. It's not natural. It's very inexpensive. It is highly toxic. And this is why this is one of the reasons we see so much more depression. Not that there was never depression in the world, of course there was. But clinically, this is what I find, okay? 10 things. Because I just mentioned a bad diet. Well, that was on the top of my list, really, okay? It's just that, I wanted to talk about low levels of testosterone, not so much for you ladies, but for men. Low levels of testosterone are what are they saying now? Something like 40-50% of men, testosterone levels have gone down in the last 20 years by 40-50%. Men need testosterone. And it's not just for muscles. It's not just, because men think of testosterone for their bedroom. But testosterone, men, is really important for your heart. Testosterone is really important, men, for your brain. You need testosterone. And most men that had clinical depression had low levels of testosterone. And ladies, guess what you had? Too much estrogen. Estrogen dominance compared to your progesterone. A hormonal thing, big time. So these are things that I found over the years. Hormonally out of balance. Yeah, saw a lot of it. Okay? Of course, we saw this, but I got to talk about it a bit. High cortisol levels. Again, that doesn't stop the butterflies in the stomach. High cortisol causes a lack of sleep. It's one of the number one symptoms, not only fatigue, cotton, like brain fog and unwellness, but one of the things it does cause is usually insomnia. And once you get into clinical depression, you can't even get out of bed. You're so knocked out. But until you get to there, usually there's high levels of cortisol that uptight. And this is where I was talking to you about, unresolved anger and fear and guilt. Those are big factors to produce cortisol in your body. And cortisol is meant for the fight or flight. It's not meant to be produced all the time. Okay? So, high cortisol levels. Here's another one. Low magnesium. Low levels of magnesium. Think of the word magnesium. When you think of magnesium, what does magnesium do? Well, look, you need magnesium for about 500 things, okay? So magnesium is very important. But here's what I found in the clinic. People were low in magnesium. When you think of magnesium, think of the word relax, okay? My kids will remember this when they were little, okay? Daddy had a line. I use this voice, by the way, the built-in microphone in the voice. I used that to great effect when my kids were young, okay? Because they knew when Daddy's voice started going up, they were in doo-doo. Like, you're crossing the line, don't cross it, okay? And, but I used to use the word like, when they were getting close to the line, relax. And they knew, Daddy, okay, Daddy's getting serious, sir. You're getting stupid, so relax. But guys, magnesium helps your body to relax. Very important to get that cortisol down. One of the things, even in our cortisol formulas, magnesium. We use magnesium, and I love magnesium. Somebody asked me on the weekend, what magnesium? Well, here's what I found clinically. It's the best of all the best is citrate. Magnesium citrate, in my opinion, is the best. Why? Because I've seen it working clinically. Now, you can take an Epsom salt bath, okay? You get magnesium salts. You can, like magnesium, I love magnesium, but for me, the number one was citrate. It's the one that is the most bioavailable. That's why I use it. I had to get results, so, okay? So I hope that answered your question. Here's another one, leaky gut. Leaky gut, leaky brain. Remember, you got more hormones in your gut than you have in your brain. You got more hormones in your gut. And leaky gut, for some people, listen, let me explain this just for a sec. Leaky gut doesn't necessarily mean you have digestive issues. You might, okay? But leaky gut doesn't mean you're necessarily going to have symptoms in your gut. Remember what I talk about all the time, that war between good and bad bacteria. If your microbiome is off, and usually it will be off, and one of the biggest things, again, I'm just going to throw it out there. You guys can take it or leave it. I'm going to throw it out there because I've said this for so many years now. I'm not the only one that have said it, but one of the few that have said this. One of the biggest problems in our society today is antibiotics. It's the double-edged sword. Antibiotics kill the infection. And am I against them? No. So don't quote me wrong. If you need an antibiotic, it can save your life. The problem is antibiotics destroy your microbiome, that ecosystem inside of your gut. And that, for a lot of people, they take antibiotics as kids, and years later, they can get clinical depression. I've seen it, and I've often talked about the link of antibiotics to autism, in my opinion. Either mommy taking the antibiotics or baby as in the first couple of years. You know, they get an ear infection, whatever, they're on antibiotics. And look, again, I'm not telling people not to take an antibiotic, but understand what it does. It affects the microbiome of your gut, and that changes your hormones. That affects your dopamine. It affects your serotonin production. It affects your GABA. And it even affects the absorption. You need good bacteria to absorb nutrients. It can affect that. And you don't even absorb B12 properly. You're not absorbing magnesium properly. You're not absorbing vitamin D properly. So these can be all factors in depression. I look at when I treated depression, I did it from a holistic point of view. Okay, I did it holistically. I was looking at deficiencies and fixing those deficiencies. And the number one thing I would start off with was the diet, change your diet, and therapeutic doses of probiotics, vitamin D, B12, magnesium, therapeutic doses of those. Okay? So, guys, thanks for watching this morning. Okay? We might do a little bit more on depression because I didn't even talk to you about inflammation and a few other things that I'm going to talk about. But, so don't be shy. Give us your feedback and questions that you have. If you get a chance, please share this with others. And remember your circle of influence, okay? You have a lot more influence than you think you do, okay? So remember that. Okay, love you guys. Talk to you soon.
You've reached the end of another Dr. Is In podcast with your hosts, Dr. Martin Jr. and Sr. Be sure to catch our next episode, and thanks for listening.